So I'll call to order the special meeting of the Charter Revision Committee on Wednesday, January 16th at 7 p.m. All stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So approval of last month's minutes. Did everybody get a chance to look over them?
Make a motion, we approve the minutes from December 5th, 2018.
Second that.
Second by O'Brien. Any discussion? All right, hearing none, I'll move it forward for approval. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Abstaining? Motion carries. Correspondence. Mr. Beeble, would you like your letter to be correspondence, or would you like an opportunity to discuss it?
In public input, I'll
Okay.
just kind of acknowledge that it's submitted.
Perfect. All right. And we haven't received anything else that I saw. Okay. So we're through correspondence. Public input. So this we will open up to individual citizens who want to share their thoughts on the charter revision we're looking at.
Okay. I submitted and left for everyone a copy of some recommendations that I have, and mostly housekeeping things. So I don't want to spend a lot of time on them. If you have any questions, we can always talk about it later as well. I had noticed a couple of things, that there isn't a section on the Housing Authority like we have for all the other appointed boards, so I drafted up some language for you on that. And then the other thing is, with regard to filling vacancies, in 2000, I can't even recall which year it was, I think I have it in here, I guess it was 2003, there had been a change to extend the time frame for filling vacancies from 30 days to 60 days, because 30 days just wasn't enough time to allow the town committees to get recommendations to the selectmen and then have the selectmen act. So that was extended. At that same time, and I was chair at that time of the Charter Revision Commission, we had one outspoken person on the board that said, well, if we're going to extend this, then 60 days is the cutoff, and then after that, it's all up to the board to make the appointment, that respective board. And I think the practice has been whichever either the Board of Selectmen or the respective board acts first after the 60 days fills the seat. And I think that the charter should be revised to make that clear that that's the way it's supposed to be. Because it really should be up to either board. Because it's possible that after 60 days, the respective board doesn't act either. And there should be a way for the Board of Selectmen to step in.
Yep.
So that's it. Again, if you have any questions, give me a call.
Does anybody have any questions for Mr. Beeble on his submission? You want a little time to review since he's here? Okay. Yeah, we'll take 3 or 4 minutes just to look it over.
It's it's okay. I'll come back if you have any questions.
Okay.
It's not.
Okay.
Or I don't want to hold up everyone else.
All right.
And again, a lot of these are housekeeping. So.
Okay. Any other public input? Yes, Mr. Knickerbocker.
Good evening, Matt Knickerbocker for the record. I just wanted to update you on something. I've had a couple of meetings this week. One legislative meeting with the Connecticut Conference of Municipalities. Today was the Council of Small Towns annual meeting and legislative council. We had at our meeting today the 2 Senate leaders and the 2 House leaders. So we had the Senate majority and minority leader, that would be Senator Fasano and Senator Austin, and then in the House, Senator Clarides and who's the other one? Matt Ritter, Representative Ritter. One of the topics I thought you should know has to do peripherally with your work here, because it involves the date of the town budget meeting, and I know that there's been some discussion about that. If anything is going to change in Hartford, especially this year, we can probably expect even longer delays in getting a budget from the state. There are factors that have changed there. They don't even begin to get their revenue numbers until the first week of April. Like 2 years ago when it took 7 months to get a state budget, I don't think it's gonna be that long, but it could be sometime into June or July before we get a budget this year, given the factors that we're aware of now. So it's my personal recommendation that we not change our date and try to chase the state, you know, and wait for our own budget process until we have a number, because it's going to be impossible to get that. As we've discussed before, being as self-sustained as possible, doing our budget when we need to do our budget. In fact, many Connecticut towns are also moving their budget process earlier in the year for the same reasons. I talked to one town first selectman today who's actually moved their budget process into March, so they're even 2 weeks earlier than us. So I just wanted to pass that along for your consideration.
Yeah, when the charter changed the town meeting date, what was the difference? Because the meeting used to be in May, correct?
It used
so
to be.
That was a month or so.
It was
the charter that we have now has it in April.
Yeah, here's the first week of April, and there's a couple of things that we could consider. But yeah, the charter changed from 2012, moved it 30 days earlier.
So 30 days earlier.
30 days earlier. You know, the ironic thing about that is that back in the days when the meeting was in May, the budget was done by the last week of March anyway.
Right.
Because
but we didn't have the machine vote.
No, there's a lot more complication with, as you know, because you've moderated you're expert moderator, so you know how those things work. There's also a lot more complication, as I'm sure Ann's going to cover, with the different abatements, the elderly abatement, the firemen's and the EMT's abatement, and those types of factors. So there are some things to consider.
Thank you.
Any other public input? Okay, hearing none, we'll move to the next item on the agenda, the election of officers. 2019 year, right?
Yeah.
So we will, I guess, start with nominations. It's chair, vice chair, and secretary are the 3 spots. So were there any nominations for chairperson?
I nominate Nick Hoffman.
I'll second that nomination.
Second. I'll accept. Are there any other nominations for the chair position? Hearing none, I'll move it to a vote. All in favor of Nick Hoffman continuing on as chair of the Charter Revision Committee for the 2019 year, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Okay, next, vice chair.
I'd like to make a motion to have Melanie O'Brien as vice chair for the Charter Revision.
I'll second. Any other nominations for vice chair of the Charter Revision Committee? Okay, hearing none, I'll move it forward to a vote. All in favor of Melanie O'Brien as vice chair for the Charter Revision Committee, signify by saying aye.
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 I knew you were in. I knew it.
All opposed? Okay. Secretary. So I will open up the floor for nominations for the position of secretary for the Charter Revision Committee.
I'd like to recommend Sharon Straight.
I second. Any other nominations? Hearing none, I move it to a vote. All in favor of Sharon Strayton continue on as secretary for the Charter Revision Committee, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? All right. Congrats.
There's a 401k and everything, you guys. It's gonna work. You gotta invest in the future.
So now we will open up the floor to Ann Sacco, our tax collector, and our registrar of voters. And I think we'll loosen it up a little bit and we can have it more conversational, just so we don't have to do everything through me. Just, you know.
I'm Ann Scacco, for those who don't know me. I am the one who handed out the Excel spreadsheet, which really is just dates. I am also the person who proposed the change the last time to change it to April. The reason for that was the biggest reason was the change in the voting. With the new ballots and the time needed, there just really isn't enough time to have the budget go down at all, period. There's not enough time to get the bills out. And we were really essentially at that time wasting in my opinion, keep that in mind, in my opinion, my goal is only to get the bills out. We were wasting really the month of April. The budget was always finished in March. Our controller at the time always went away for the month of April, and so we never had any kind of activity until May, when he returned. And so the budget always was completed well before the April time frame. So I proposed changing it to April based on a few other towns I had researched at the time. If you look at this sheet, the very first one, 2013, which was really 2013 grand list for me. The budget went down 3 times. We had 3 budget votes that year, and the bills did not go out until August. Because of that, we lost $18,000 a month in revenue. So it's not just for 1 year. That's $18,000 a month for 15 years. We never gained that interest back, ever. We did not at that time do any additional billing. Down at the bottom, I have listed the cost to bill, the cost to do another full billing should the budget go down more than, you know, if we decided to do another full bill where everybody got a bill for real estate, motor vehicle, personal property tax, it would cost the same amount. There is no break. If we only did, say, a supplemental real estate bill, it would cost us $14,000. I estimated overtime because I honestly don't know how much time it would take. We've only had a supplemental bill one other time since I've been here, which is 25 years, and that was in 1996. And we were not as computerized as we are now, so we really essentially at that time had a lot of overtime and a lot of time put in because everything was processed manually then. We're much more efficient, so I just did like 3 weekends of overtime because I just am really guesstimating there. And then the loss of interest. The second year on there, 2015, you'll see that's the first year we had an April vote, and the budget did go down once, but we were still able to get the bills out by June 16th. The biggest, one of the biggest things in getting the budget out for me, getting the bills out, is I can't do a thing, and neither can the assessor until we have a mill rate. And once the mill rate's established, I still have to wait for the assessor. She has to do all of her state homeowners. That's why that's listed on there. She has to do all of her homeowners first, then I have to do all the local homeowners. But because they work together and offset each other, I can't do mine until she does hers. Then all our bills are printed by our software provider. We go into a queue with 169 other towns that are all up there waiting for their bills to be printed. So really have no control over when they get printed as well. So the sooner you get them in, the sooner you can get them out. Does anybody have any questions? Sure.
You mentioned, going back a little, that the controller's absent for the whole month of April every year?
Not this,
No,
no.
that's a,
Not this
that's.
one.
Not the new one,
Exactly.
not the new one.
No,
Okay.
that was the
No.
prior.
I was
That
gonna
was
say, what's with that? That's taxes.
Well, no. He had vacation time, and
Oh, I
that much
know.
vacation time. Yeah, he was on vacation. It's just that he happened to take it the month of April. So we, a whole month of April. So
Well,
everything.
in fairness, he spent a lot of time, a lot of late nights prior to going on vacation.
Absolutely,
And
Sharon.
once that budget was
Absolutely.
formed, he was out of it.
Yeah, once the but that's the key, the budget was formed, and we can do it, and we have done it, and we've done it since this, so, the budget, I know some people have talked about, not knowing the revenue. I really wanted to get into that while Bob was here, because I know some taxpayers have brought up revenue. It's 2-year budget, as Matt said, 2 years ago, we didn't have numbers until October.
November, actually.
Yeah,
November.
I mean, there's just, we're not getting numbers in time to do any, to even if you changed it to May, you're still not gonna have those numbers. You're just not gonna have them. And Bob can speak further to that.
Yeah, you know, when we try to work up the mill rate ahead of time, we're working with numbers that CCM or cost is forwarding to us based on their assumptions from Hartford, you know, and at the same time, we take a conservative point of view on it because, I mean, just this past year, there was about 800,000, I think it was, maybe 7, that we're supposed to get in ECS dollars. But with the condition of the state, I don't know if we're gonna receive it. So you don't work that into the figures. You know, so you use your best estimate, but like Ann says, you know, the first year of a biannual budget, it's gonna go later. A couple of years ago, that was a little
2017, last
aberration, I
session,
mean,
yeah.
being as late as it was, but normally you don't have those, the real numbers until sometime in, you know, June, somewhere in that time frame.
So how do you develop a budget? I mean, that's, without knowing the real numbers, how do you get to the mill rate,
Well,
you know, and then have the
The numbers
assessment?
aren't really gonna be off that much from year to year.
Okay, 700,000 is a percentage. How do you calculate
Well,
that 700 you
case,
might
they were
get or
saying-
not get?
In that case, they were saying we were going to receive the money. And I said, when I was preparing the budget, I'm not sure if we're gonna receive it because the state's in the condition they're in. And they may still take it, we've only received one payment so far for ECS dollars, and it's 1.9 million. We're supposed to get a little over $8 million. Are we gonna get the full 8? I don't know. But I did the conservative approach and I backed off 800,000.
Right, but what if you get that money and we've already
Then-
set the mill rate and the bills already went
Then at
out?
that point, what you wind up using that money for is to pay down short-term debt, or, you know, the capital programs that are coming due. There's close to $8 million this year that we have to discuss. I mean, you look at it, you know, and the possibility of using the money for those purposes.
What I think is not fair is you set the mill rate, we figure out what we're all paying. Some people are having a hard time paying their taxes, and now we're saying this is what you're gonna pay for your real estate taxes this year. Oh, but we have some extra now we're gonna pay short-term debt. You know, I mean, I know at the end of the day it all works because we're paying debt down, but it still put that bill in their pocket for the year.
Well, ultimately, if you're paying down the short-term debt, you're paying less interest, and interest rates are rising, so you're saving the taxpayers money too, because you're paying off that debt sooner.
If I want to, this was discussed with the Senate and House leadership quite at length today. I'll say a couple of things. One is the best you can hope for, if everybody in Hartford is behaving themselves, is that they will establish the budget and we'll get a firm number on municipal aid before the mill rate is set. So the budget process can proceed along. The real important part is to know what that is before you actually set the mill rate. So 2 years ago, we had no idea. We just, you know, based on an estimate, we had the Board of Finance set the mill rate, and then the actual budget, the actual revenue numbers came in later. Now, if the revenue numbers come in a little bit higher, or even significantly higher, say we planned conservatively and said, well, you know, they say we're gonna get 8 million in school aid, but we think it's gonna be 7.5. And then all of a sudden, there's a miracle, you know. They do some trickery in Hartford and they come up with the whole amount of ECS, and now we've got a $500,000 revenue surplus. When this happened, well, that didn't happen, but when the state didn't get their act together 2 years ago, they actually passed legislation that would allow towns to adjust their mill rate in the middle of the year if there's a disaster. If that doesn't happen, it's actually possible, and this is something we'd have to discuss with the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Finance, but you can establish financial policies that under certain conditions, you can take that unexpected revenue and apply it to the year coming up, which is going to be a savings that the taxpayers would realize. They just wouldn't realize it that year. It would roll into the next year. There's a variety of ways to do it, but I think the important part is to not hamstring the town administration into a schedule where we're trying to chase that number, thereby making everything late and missing out on tens of thousands or even, you know, 100,000 in additional revenue through the interest charges. Because you never, like Ann said, you never get that back. It's better to plan conservatively as we can and get the budget done early and get those bills out, and then make whatever adjustments later than it is to wait and try to do a hand-to-mouth budget with every penny that you know, might come back from the state. We've been far more successful in managing our fund balance and bringing the bond rating up to AAA by doing the conservative method than by waiting to see what every penny is going to be from the state. I think that's the method that Bob has been employing for the last few years has really improved the financial health of the town.
And if the scenario that Matt mentioned about adjusting the mill rate, and you've already sent the bills out, what happens then?
It really depends on how we've done it. If the town could at that time decide, well, we're only gonna place the burden on the real estate, and we could adjust the real estate bill by sending another bill out just for real estate only. There is a cost impact down there for that. That's about $14,000 to do that. If they decided everybody's getting an adjustment across the board, I know some towns did that 2 years ago. It kind of turned into a nightmare because when you adjust the mill rate for a little bit, I mean, they were sending out bills for $1.50 and costs like way more to send that bill out than what they were getting back in revenue. Plus people weren't paying them, and it just was double work and double billing, you know. So you have to be practical. I don't ever recommend, unless you've got a significant increase in resending out motor vehicle bills. There's just too many of them. I have 24,000 motor vehicle bills to send. If they all get bills for a couple dollars, it's just an expense that the town has, and it's a lot of work to process. Real estate, that's a different animal, because you're gonna see bills that would be significantly higher, as we had when we had the supplemental bills in 1996. Those bills all averaged $100 to $400 at that time. The only thing about that that's unclear is what happens then to the elderly abatement program, which works off the cost. In 1996, we could not give the elderly their abatement on their July bill because we knew the supplemental bill was coming, and we didn't have a dollar amount to give them because we didn't have a full bill. Okay. So we gave them their benefit starting in October, and that was an extreme hardship on the people that are used to paying a reduced amount, that then had to come up with the money in July for a full bill when they were waiting for their supplemental bill to get their adjustment, because there just wasn't a way to do it without having the full amount.
Oh, so if somebody got $1,000 credit, they were getting the full bill like anybody that wasn't a senior? That's what you
correct.
mean? I'm sorry.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, that is what I mean.
So
In
it might be
July.
$500 a quarter or something, and that, they were getting that first bill,
Yes,
full bill.
yep, yeah, so if they were getting, yeah, that's it, exactly.
Right.
Yeah, so if you had someone who gets 75% off their taxes, and I have a number of people that do, they were getting a full tax bill for July, not the benefit of their abatement
Yeah,
until.
everything was, the dust was
until
settled. Right.
Everything settled and I could give them the right amount. Does that answer your question?
It answers my question, but I just feel that as many things as we can tell the taxpayer and be completely transparent with them, we should do.
Well,
And some of these, you know, I understand where the money went and I understand all that. But there's some people that $800,000 might have helped a little bit. Instead of putting it in something that they can't see.
I agree.
They cannot see it. They can't see where the interest and bonding and all these things are going. They only see their bill that they get at home. And then they read in the paper that the town got an extra $800,000. Because I can tell you there were phone calls at my house to Rich about it. Or does that mean I'm getting a new tax bill?
well,
And I understand where you're coming from, I
right,
totally do.
I mean, I'm coming from the process of getting the bills out and the cost involved. And, you know, I think that it's more likely than not that we are probably not gonna have those numbers, at least every other year. That's a guarantee. So that's every other year you're gonna be faced with late billings, probably. But the budget process to me, and it does involve the mill rate and stuff, but that's only a small portion. The budget process really is about the needs of the town. And no matter what, the people are voting on not just the mill rate, but they're voting on what they want to see in their town, what they want to see in their police department and their education and their schools. They're voting on that. They're not just voting on a mill rate. Yes, a lot of people do vote on the mill rate, but
But they assume that the state is gonna reimburse the town for some of it. The general public knows that there's state money, which is our money.
I was gonna, I would differ with you there, John, and I'll
Really?
tell you why. Because you see us, if you look at the voters, you know how many voters come out and vote. That's like this much of the town. And I see thousands of them, literally thousands of them. And most people have no idea. I mean, they'll come in and they'll say, how come my taxes are so high and my road's not paved? Well, they're connected. Your road's not paved because maybe they cut the highway department, or, you know, I mean, people don't make the connection. They truly, truly don't. And state money, they don't make it, the connection at all. And it's printed on every bill because that's a state statute.
Right.
You read your tax bill, I print on every single one how much the mill rate would be without state and federal aid.
Right.
We have to put that on there. But we don't always have the numbers in time, you know, for the mill rate. And I mean, I know it's a difficult decision. I know a lot of people want to know that mill rate amount. And I understand completely, Sharon, I do. Probably more so than anybody here in this room. I see more of it.
I'm familiar with the work that you do, believe me. But I just feel the more information we can give a voter or a taxpayer.
Or the most accurate.
Right, is the best. That we should.
I just don't know if you're gonna be
I think
able to do that.
that's shared
Yeah,
up to the people who are crafting the budget as well. You know, I mean, like,
right.
a lot of the stuff we're trying to base off formulas that you'd hope they'll fulfill. You know, and I think as a whole, between Terry and Bob, we always play conservative, which has been a buffer for us. But I'm looking at this year's long session deadlines for committees to come out to move their bills out of committee. So education is April 1st, which I guess this could be an asset too. But finance, revenue, and bonding is May 2nd, and appropriations is May 3rd. So that's just to come out of committee,
Right,
not
I
even to be
realize
voted
that.
on the floor and discussed. So, I mean, by that, this isn't, moving this isn't really going to improve much of anything. Right? We're still not going to have the information. And it's like last time, like when we finally we got a budget, was like, what, October 17th or so?
It was about November 1st.
Yeah. And then the following Friday, we find through the governor's edict that we lost ECS funding. So what we thought we had was gone within a week's time.
Well, just on a final note from me, I mean, obviously, I would like it to stay the same. If it's changed, we'll deal with it. We do our job, we'll do whatever it is we have to do to make it happen. It just may cost you some money to have that happen on a more regular basis, because if it goes down, there's just not enough room to get in another vote. There just isn't, and get the bills out on time.
Well, but the budget can go down, we have no control over that.
I know. Well, that's why I'm trying to hedge my bet by moving, because if you look at the time frame that they need, which they'll go into further, you're talking every time the budget goes down at least a minimum of 2 weeks, minimum of 2 weeks of time to get it going again, 10 days, to have another vote or to have the machines ready. So 3 times, that's 30 days, you lost a month. 2 times it's 20 days, you've lost 20 days.
But
and
none of us have that control.
But that puts you in May and June already,
Yeah.
so you're not gonna you're not gonna hit getting it out on time. That's all I'm saying.
I want to make one final comment. Ann is being a very good employee and saying, if it's changed, she'll deal with it. I am really very firmly against changing it. And there's a couple of issues. One, there is no reason to change this. The change to the first week of April has worked for us. It has made the town healthier financially. Even in the 2 occasions where we've had a budget defeat, there's been enough time to get those things out. And I well understand, I've got a call or two myself. I understand there will always be people who are struggling. What we're considering here is making a change that affects the financial health of the entire town. And I think that there are other ways to deal with those folks that are really having a hard time. We have, the elderly tax abatement program is still being reviewed and could be improved. We're now, Board of Selectmen voted just last night to consider additional benefits for firefighters, EMTs, and fire police. So I don't want to jeopardize what we've done that has proven to be a good program, to actually give us the ability to sustain our budgets and move forward. To go backwards is sort of like going back to those days of no forward planning, hand-to-mouth budget, cut out every penny you can, and then you have to deal with shortfalls the following year. What Bob Kozlowski's trying to do now in working with the Board of Selectmen and Board of Finance, we look out 2 or 3 years down the road and we try to predict where those things are going to go. Because what we don't want is mill rates that go like this, and then like this, then up, and then back down. We try to look at the long term and keep it level. If it has to go up, try to just smooth it out so that it's predictable. Now, you brought up transparency. I think transparency is a separate issue altogether, and that can be handled. I mean, we can tell the voters exactly how we arrived at the estimate. We can tell them what Hartford might do or might not do. We can put all that in front of them. But I think it's imperative that we establish our own budget and not be tied at the hip to Hartford, because we'll see what happens this year, but I just don't see them getting any more functional than they have been for the last 2 years. So we have something that works, that has improved our financial health, it's improved our fund balance, it's maintained our bond rating. Let's keep it the way it is.
I would be happy to come back at any time that you guys have any further questions. If you review things and you decide you want to discuss things, you can again, and be more than happy to come back.
I just have two more things if you don't mind.
Yeah, go ahead.
So years ago, when we set a budget, we would get little things like the Board of Ed decided we saved money on insurance or something like that, little numbers, right? So what happened? The state's out of money and this is why we can't get a budget and can't get state funding numbers? Is that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, the state's having a hard time deciding how they want to handle municipal aid and a couple other things.
Right, because they're out of money. But that's typically,
Yeah.
so 5 years ago, we really didn't have this problem.
That's
Or
correct.
10 years ago, we didn't have this problem.
That's correct.
I would say a number of years ago, there was always an issue with insurance coming
Yeah.
in. I think insurance was a big thing.
Yeah,
to
right,
come
those
in.
are, but they're little numbers compared to, you know, waiting for.
Well, they're big numbers
Well,
when
they're
you're
big
talking, they're
numbers.
big numbers, they can be big numbers.
Mhm.
But
Yeah,
in
about the
recent
same.
years, and Bob was here and we had talked about it before, so I don't feel uncomfortable sharing, you know, in recent years, they have those numbers, they have those estimates of
Mhm.
where they're gonna be, are very, very close. So the numbers are not as skewed as they used to be. They used to be skewed by 10 or 15%, and that's not happening any longer because, you know, not all the town employees, but a number of the town employees are part of the state program.
Yep.
And so we have some of those numbers now that you don't see big numbers flying around that are different. So I think the biggest number that you're gonna look at is the money that comes from the state or doesn't come from the
Right,
state.
that's the part, right.
And
Yeah.
it's, I mean, Melanie and I were on that negotiating team with the teachers union, which was the first to go in Bethlehem. I think the first full teachers union in the state, or at least the area, to go over to that health. And we had a lot of consternation about it because at the time it felt like rolling the dice. Like if other
Right.
towns that are not into it,
We're trying to set a budget,
Yeah.
we really don't, you know,
But
part of
it's-
setting the budget is having numbers, you know?
yeah, but it stabilized, and actually with some of the union concessions, I think in 2017, it ended up to our financial benefit because the insurance wasn't as robust as it was prior to the concessions. So.
Yeah.
So, and my last question, Ian, so 18,000 is 1 month's bill going out a month late, correct? So they should go out July 31st, but they went out in September, and 18,000 equals 1 month of interest
Correct.
based on the money that went out.
And that's an approximate, I did a 3-year average, that's a 3-year average.
Is that a real cost because the town has to borrow that money to maintain their operations?
I would not say that the town has to borrow, but it is a real cost when, well, let me rephrase that.
Time value of money.
When, if we didn't have a healthy collection rate and we did not collect taxes as well as we do in Bethel, you would need that money to borrow to fulfill your budget needs. That's where your interest comes in. You use that money in borrowing and to offset the people that don't pay their taxes on time.
Great,
So,
thank you for coming.
If I could just kind of fill in, I mean, as far as registrars are concerned with the date, whether it's May or April, if you look at that first year, the 2014 on the spreadsheet, that was November 2014 was when the last charter revision was voted on and implemented the earlier April town meeting. And you can see that year, then in 2014, under the old program, we didn't have the first vote until May 15th. But the vote went down twice, the budget went down
Actually
twice.
went down 3 times, I found the other.
I thought
minutes.
so too.
So there was 4 votes that year.
you found the
Yeah.
other note?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right.
And
I
so,
knew there were 4.
but in the end,
Because I made
the last vote was July 17th. So we had already started our fiscal year and we hadn't settled on a budget yet. So that creates problems. For the registrars, we vote on a budget referendum, maybe we're hiring 40, 45 people to work as poll workers. It's not that easy to find people in July. They're going on vacation, they're not around, so
Yeah,
it gets a little more difficult. Again, that's trivial compared to the issues that you're dealing with here, but it becomes an issue for us.
We had 1 vote in May, 2 in June, and then the last one that passed was in July.
So, and if that's it, then Nancy and I could go into the registrar.
Any other questions for Ann before we?
So even if we decided that we're gonna have the budget, the first budget in July, you're thinking we're gonna miss it anyway? Because numbers don't come until September, October, real numbers?
Every 2 years, because the.
Right, every
budget's
2
in-
years,
No,
right.
long
Yeah,
session,
I
right.
mean, on the other year, you may get them early enough, you know, but based on the last 2-year budget, they didn't come until very, very late. And I just don't see that improving. And part of the reason, and it really has nothing to do with this, is that I look at what we've got, and we, mandated things where there is, and I'm sure everybody has heard that, mandated things that are no longer funded. I have that with the state elderly program. It's no longer funded by the state, but it's a mandated program.
Right.
So, I don't see some of that stuff improving. I just see them getting worse.
Thank you.
I just want to thank you very much. This is
Yeah,
very helpful.
Thanks a lot. And we'll definitely reach out to you if more questions come to mind.
Okay. Thank you.
Does everybody know?
Before we change it to July.
Well, I say that because I'm on the twilight years of my career. It's very easy for me to say.
Gotta have a 10-year plan.
Because
Gotta have a 10-year plan.
I am in those twilight years.
You're gonna leave me high and dry.
So does everybody know Nancy Ryan and Tim Bebo are registered voters?
Yep.
No, they've never seen us.
So we have, you take a look at that handout that Nancy had sent around. That's the list of tasks that the registrars must do between the town meeting and the election, or the referendum vote. And most critical to the whole thing is our getting ballots, because we don't print them on the copy machine down the hallway. They get sent out to one of 2 approved vendors from the state of Connecticut, and we're at the mercy of them and shippers to get our ballots in time. And last year, so in the April 2018 vote, we didn't receive our ballots until 1 o'clock in the afternoon the day before the election. And so we were going up to see Sharon at 2:30 to set up the Stony Hill voting place. And between 1 and 2:30, we had to take all those ballots, and Nancy and I had to put them into the ballot bags, allocate them to the different polling places, seal them up and get them out. But we were facing a real possibility. Well, let me back up too. We were so panicked about this, we were looking out the window, looking for the UPS guy.
We actually literally chased them down the street. I ran out there and chased them down School Street. Because they, so the town clerk is part of this too. The town clerk writes out the ballot. She gets the language from Marty. Has to read it, approve it, etc. Some of the stuff that prior to the town meeting, we do a little bit more before the town meeting. But sometimes it's a bit of a, I would say, crapshoot. So if the language of the town meeting is put together and a PDF of the ballot proof goes to the company that provides us with not just the ballots but the memory cards for all of their parts that they have to do to make sure that it's going to work. And then there's another part of that too, which is like, again, down below after the town meeting, but we got to start the process ahead of time. We choose to use that accessible voting systems in referenda. We're not required to by the state, but a DOJ investigation was started in 2017 specific to using the accessible voting systems, the old ones, in referenda. Kind of got us thinking maybe we should be. So we get that process started too, and that was actually a little late last year too. So that process gets started, yet if there were changes made during the town meeting to, it's actually the amount of the ballot, then we would have to make sure we get that correct amount, put it in the PDF before the ballots get printed. So we do not print the ballots ahead of time, but the PDF goes to the company and they're kind of waiting. So the town meeting's often on a Monday. On Tuesday morning, Lisa gets here as early as she can and calls them up and says, go. They print. And we had 7 days to do our preparations last year. And we've done it within 7 days before. Actually, in 2016, somehow we did it in 6 days, which is not according to the charter. I don't know how that got by anybody.
And it was 7, but you can't really say 7. We had 6 to prepare. And 7th was the election day, so that doesn't count for us. That's just 6 days to prepare for it.
And when UPS came in the morning with their deliveries, the stuff was on the truck, but he didn't have it he delivered the stuff he had listed, and then he was gonna come back at 3 o'clock and deliver the rest of the stuff, which were all the boxes of ballots. So Lisa was on the phone yelling at UPS.
Talk about stress.
Threatening them.
Talk about
And
stress.
we leave our office at 1 o'clock, we come down here and we do all the setup here. We go out to Stony Hill at 2:30. We can't go into Berry School until after the buses leave, so that's usually 3:45. So that's how we set it all up. And everything is usually ready to go.
And we're not done until 5, so
Yeah.
we can't really come back here after that.
So literally, we were chasing the UPS guy. I saw him pull into the doctor's office across the street. I went running over there. He had just driven out and went down to the doctor's office, the eye doctor down there. I grabbed him and he was like, oh, I wasn't gonna come back. I said, you've gotta come now, please. And he did. He came, we unloaded all the boxes. As Tim said, we packed them while the setup was going on here, and then we made it out to Stony Hill in time. It's the first time that's happened, but it could. And something that we've learned, having had a referendum on October 17th, 2 years ago, and then a municipal election 3 weeks later, we're not the only game in town. The printer is the only game in town. The memory card people are the only game in town. So we're using them, but so is a lot of the other municipalities in Connecticut and throughout New England and throughout the country. So to expect that when we send them a ballot PDF, and they do hire extra people, I'm sure, they're ready to go. We've never had any problems getting our election ballots or primary ballots on time. But the referendum, we have that short time frame. We'd like to extend the time frame a little bit so that we don't end up in these situations again. And we have some recommendations.
Yeah, so our recommendation is right now, C6-3B1 regarding the budget referendum says that the budget referendum has to be set for 7 to 15 days after the budget hearing, or
The annual
annual town meeting. And we're just saying, change it to have 10 days be the upfront time frame. And then, you know, there were other areas that kind of come into play as well on petition to overrule, but it's the same sort of thing. Give us at least the 10 days. And if we had not received those ballots, we would have had to photocopy ballots and had everyone hand turn them in, and hand count them.
You can't do a mix.
You wouldn't have gotten results that night. You might get results the next day, sometime. And we'd have to hire a lot more people for counting ballots. You wouldn't be able to use the scanner machines.
So, and then a little bit before that, the annual town budget meeting, the current charter calls for having the annual town meeting within the first 7 days of April. So, in discussion with Matt and Bob, Ann was there too, we talked about extending that time frame too, because not knowing when those first 7 days are gonna fall, and do we have things thrown in there like Easter or other holidays, does that create too short a period of time to get that annual town meeting in? And something that we didn't think about this initially, it was actually before Tim and I were registrars, I was deputy at the time. Having it in April, we have to take into consideration, well, we do take into consideration, we don't have to, spring break for schools. So we have to think about, do we want to have a budget vote in the middle of spring break for schools? Are we going to be missing a lot of people who would normally come out to vote? There's nothing says that we can't, but do we want to? So we actually look at that ahead of time and try to see if we can get with the Board of Selectmen before they set the date for the town meeting, so we can have enough time to prepare, but also avoid having it in the middle of the school vacation.
And that's something that you may want to think about as well. Our charter should provide the structure for the government and not rely on the good manners of elected officials, right? So with the way we have it now, with the budget in the first week, or the annual town budget meeting the first week of April, and a time frame of up to 14 days or 15 days to set the budget referendum vote, someone in the future could purposely set the budget referendum vote for when schools are on vacation. And perhaps you want to take a look at that and just say, you know, right now it says 10 to 15 days excluding Saturdays, Sundays, and holidays. You might throw in school vacations, just to make sure that no one would schedule it during that time frame. But we do, all of this is kind of work around that. As it is, and I think you pointed out about the turnout, we get, what, maybe 25% turnout for a budget referendum?
30's been our highest in the recent years.
So,
30%.
you know, if you held it while schools are on vacation and you relied on everyone to do absentee voting, you probably would be well below 20.
What's your average when it fails in the second vote, the third vote? Do you have any idea?
It's often a little bit higher the next time around.
Mm-hmm.
So it's about the same, and that 2014, I think when it finally passed in June, we had a whole, like 600 more people show up to vote. I don't know how they got another 600 people.
I don't know.
Or who got, you know, we don't actually, even though the notices have to go out, we put it on the Facebook page, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
We don't do the advertising. But I remember that thinking, okay, finally the budget passed, and 600 people in a referendum is a lot of people.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So, and then, you know, this section C6-5E about petition to overrule, that's a similar issue. And right now, I think it's, I'm trying to remember what it says now. I think now it goes 7 to 14 days. And so the suggestion is make it consistent, go 10 to 15 days. It also doesn't currently exclude Saturdays, Sundays, and legal holidays. So that one really jams us up. Again, petition overrule. What I don't have for you now, and I'd like to work on, is section C6-8, action requiring referendum. And it's just a one sentence
It's a small little section which
about
governs.
a capital budget referendum, and it doesn't give any direction as to the timeframes or anything. So, you know, we'll take a look at that and see what kind of recommendations we can have for you there.
So if we're gonna have a referendum to appropriate the expenditure of, it's usually over $1 million, I think is what the charter calls for
Right.
now.
Mhm.
We're gonna spend 17 million on something, or 65 million on school renovations. You wanna have some specific language to make sure that a referendum is going to be
Very.
planned for properly, to get a vote out. So that time
Mhm.
frame, you may wanna look at that, and if Tim's gonna write something for you, well, that's good.
So, yeah, and I don't think there's anything else on that. I guess the other thing too is that we're always looking to save money. And actually Nancy and I, over the past 4 years, have come in year after year going to the Board of Finance for our budget request, and each year we ask for less than the year before, and less than the year before. And we're finding more efficient ways of working. And so it's working out well. But the one possibility is we can never put a budget question or a referendum question on our general election ballot, because our general election ballot has to be set 60 days prior to the election. But our ordinance or our charter says that once you have a town meeting, you have to have your budget vote within 15 days. And two things are coming into play there. If we were all of a sudden having to vote, or actually this did happen the last year, I think it was last year.
2017.
When 2017, we had a referendum vote in October, and a few weeks later, we had our general election. Well, when we have are tying up our tabulators, and we are, you know, we have to lock down those tabulators, and we can't use them in the general election then. That's one issue. But if we could have put that vote in with the other, we could have saved $8,000 or $10,000.
One of the things that we have to think about in that situation, if it's an expenditure of money, we would have to create, which we could do easily, a way for taxpayers to vote, which we would do. They would vote separately. But, and I had mentioned this to Matt too, and when we were talking about this, there are towns, municipalities in Connecticut that have a different way of, some towns or municipalities don't have referendums because they have a mayor and a city council
different.
or an RTM or whatever. So they don't have budget referendums, but if they're gonna vote, they call it a bond vote, a large amount of money, they have to put together some sort of a referendum or a bond vote. Some of them have it worded in a way that it somehow can get on an election, because it, as Tim said, when the state is setting the ballot for an election, whether it's municipal or state and federal, any question that's going to be on the ballot has to be to the state at the beginning of September. So there's date, we haven't gotten the election calendar yet, but there's a date by which it has to be approved by the Board of Selectmen, and then 2 weeks later, a date by which that question has to be submitted to the state so it can be put on the ballot. This doesn't allow for that. So
Because
some
if
of
it's a state election, you need it by September.
Yeah, we can't put it
We
on.
don't know the
Right.
questions, yeah.
Right.
So we always have to run a separate referendum from the general election because there's a conflict.
Well, I think it's just
between the two.
important to
Ballot
explain to
space.
everybody that might not realize that not everybody gets to vote for a first selectman if they're a taxpayer. It's a budgetary.
Right, right.
Yeah.
So if it was a municipal year and there were a question on, all the regular voters in the town of Bethel would be able to vote on that municipal budget plus the question.
Right.
Taxpayers would have to still come here to whatever place we would designate, whether they have a special ballot or just because we often have maybe 25 taxpayers at the most.
But explain what a taxpayer is. People
So-
might not realize. When you say
Right.
taxpayer, we're all taxpayers.
We're all taxpayers, but you vote on budget issues, the budget vote or any other type of referendum where there's an expenditure of money. You vote as your registered voter address in your polling place. People own property in town, individuals own property in town. They're allowed to vote on. any
And they
of
live
those
out of
issues.
town.
And they live in Danbury,
They-
right?
They may be a registered
Ready.
voter, but not here.
Yep. So, right,
Yeah.
so there's a process, there's actually a statute, part of the statute, which we print up and we actually have them sign it saying, yes, I own property in Bethel, I pay taxes on it, I live in Reading. We usually have them write down the address of the Bethel location and their address where they live, check their ID.
And we check them against the grand list, so we know that they are.
We borrow the grand list from Anne Marie, from Izzy, and keep that in, so we check, it's either a motor vehicle assessed over $1,000 or property assessed over $1,000. And it has to be in the individual's name. So if you come to vote as yourself, but you come because you own whatever LLCs, you can't vote as the LLC. So it has to be in the individual's name. So a lot of people have properties that they rent mostly.
I wanted to just give you a quick illustration about the timeline that Nancy was talking about a few minutes ago. When we were voting on the police station, the first vote was in December of 2014, and it went down. So the building committee worked with the police commission, came up with new numbers, and it was actually ready to go back to the voters by like the end of August. And we couldn't have a referendum then because it was primary season. And then they had to get ready for the general election. And then they had to get ready for the referendum, and that wound up pushing it all. I mean, we lost 5 whole months in that
It was
process.
almost like a blackout.
Yeah, and people said, well, we have an election, we have a general election coming up in November, why don't we just put it on there? But right now, the charter says, if you have your town meeting and approve it, then the referendum must be within, no less than 7, no more than 14 days. So if there's a carve-out where we can say, if you're in a certain window and there's a general election coming up, we can delay that and then make it more efficient, save the taxpayer money, not have to run a separate one-off referendum, which costs about, what, $15,000, I think. And
So,
yeah,
in
so
order to do
that's, I
that-
think, is a good opportunity.
right, in order to do that, and I would not know how to word that. And I suggested, I don't know if there's a way for you to.
That's why we have Nick.
That's, we'll work on it.
But I would
Tricky
check
wording.
with other municipalities through CCM or cost
Yes.
or, and to see if they have something.
Yes, they do. There are
That's-
towns that have done that.
Yeah, and then that way you can have, instead of reinventing the wheel, you have some general idea on how, some towns, I know, don't put the budget amount on there. They actually say the amount approved at the meeting. So, and that's what people are used to. They're not used to seeing a number, they're used to the
Talk about
amount approved at the seat.
Yeah,
So that
well, right, it
becomes-
gets your transparency.
Yeah.
But if we didn't have to have it on the ballot, if we could put it, paste it in the privacy booth, then we could get our ballots much faster. We wouldn't need it.
I'm not recommending that, I'm just
No.
saying some
Yeah,
towns do
that's
it.
not a good idea.
And
Don't-
it doesn't.
Also, if you could tie something in, like the police station with something else that was big, you'd have a better turnout.
Sure,
Right?
sure.
Because people don't come out for single items as
Well,
much.
look at how we've done, how we have to do votes on the charter.
Right.
It has to be a percentage
Mhm.
of the voters in the town, and so it's always
So you gotta
tied to,
piggyback
it's
it.
always on a even year on the back of the ballot.
Right.
You can't fit it on the municipal ballot.
No, there's not, I was gonna
So
say,
it's-
there's no space there.
Yeah.
And I think
Don't
it-
you think that you'd get I'm sorry, Tim.
Go ahead, you go.
If you separate a vote, I know it costs money, but if you're talking about a $60 million school improvement, right? And you bundle it into a general election of the voter that maybe is not really educated and they gotta fill out 26 bubbles and they get to the back page and they're just pro everything and they just start hitting yeses, maybe you're not getting a real accurate flavor of what if it was just a referendum vote
We would
on
never
one
know.
item.
Yeah, we wouldn't know.
Well, that's my point.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, if a referendum comes to spend $60 million, what do you
Yeah.
get? 10% of the voter come in? I'm just guessing.
Well, it's-
No,
it
we,
depends on
so
the
the
subject.
school vote, I
25,
think,
30.
the school.
You
yeah,
think that
the
much? As
school-
much as a general election?
No,
Yeah.
general election is higher than that.
No, the referendums are between 20 and 30%.
That's good.
Municipal
Yeah.
election is 60%, and we had 80,
Did
almost
70,
80,
well, we had
70%.
70 for the state.
State election.
And we had 80 for the presidential.
85, I think, 80 or 85, I can't
Yeah.
remember. Yeah.
And then if you put one item on the back page, and even though the checkers and everybody says there's both sides that vote, people don't do it.
Yeah.
So that poor thing on the last page
Police
by
commission's
itself,
done.
forget it.
Well, that happens with the municipal election.
Right.
They're always told there are two sides to the ballot, and when we do audits, you get, because we have to hand count them,
Yeah,
sometimes people just never vote the other side.
they never turn it on.
Yeah. And that's how many years have we been doing this, so that's kind of like civics 101 yet.
They don't.
We got them to the room, but they just don't vote.
That's
it.
about it.
And we tell
sometimes.
everybody, right, every
Yeah.
person who comes in.
They want to fax it to us.
I have a couple questions. So with
Yeah.
an average 25% turnout for referendums, would it make sense to just use 2 poll stations? Could we use Stony Hill and the Municipal Center? Is
That would
there-
be done. The problem is, the voters are already trained to go where they go.
Mhm.
And then if we decided that we were just going to use 2 out of the 3 polling places, people will show up, let's say, let's not do Stony Hill, it's too small,
Right,
right?
and then
So they'll go to Stony Hill, then they'll find out it's somewhere else, they'll just say, forget it.
Don't go to Berry, they won't go.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
So
It's
actually,
tough.
in last year, when we had we had 2 votes last year. So the first one was April 11th, which was a Wednesday. So we had people show up here on Tuesday to vote while we were still getting ready. We had people obviously showed up on Wednesday to vote, and then we actually had people show up on Thursday to vote. So they get sent that thing. Everybody in town gets sent that good-sized card.
Vote early and often, you know?
Just, I don't know.
Well, people always ask about early voting, I always tell them, yeah, it's at 6 a.m.
Right.
Well, and that's-
Set your alarm.
That's the other part of it, and that seems to be quite a topic of conversation up in Hartford this week.
Yeah.
Is off the top of your head, is there anything in the charter we should be looking at to be? I mean, it's state law, so we're gonna have to comply.
I don't think it's going to be affected by the charter.
Yeah.
I
no matter
don't
what.
think for referendums, well, it's like, we would still have absentee and,
Mhm.
And keeping in mind, this won't happen probably for 2 years, because they need a constitutional,
Yeah.
constitutional amendment, and that might not even, unless they get, was it 75%
Of that, yeah.
a positive vote from the legislature?
It doesn't
They have
pass.
to get 2 years of positive vote of less
for
than
it to be on the
75.
2020
Yeah,
ballot, so.
and so
Okay.
it may, and then it doesn't take effect until the following go around, so.
And to expand on what you asked about, Nick, we have had discussions about, because there's nothing that says that we have to have all our polling places open for a
Mhm.
referendum. We can do it all here, we can do it all at various schools. Yet we've had discussions about, would there be parking issues, et cetera, if you did it all in one place. We've talked with municipalities where they did downsize to one polling place, it works fine, and we've talked to others where people were pissed because they couldn't, it was at whatever the biggest school was, I think Monroe did it a few years back. People couldn't park, and they were pissed, and they left, and they didn't vote.
Mhm.
So they went back to having more polling places open. So, would people get used to it? Ridgefield changed to one polling place, maybe 6 or 7 years ago.
Mhm.
They save money, it works for them. I don't know specifically where they do
Yeah.
it, but parking is
But
always,
yeah, I know Newtown
parking
does
and
as well.
accessibility to
Yeah.
the space is always gonna be an issue.
Right.
This seems to work best, but it would be nice if more people showed up.
Well, this year, both for District 1 and 4, which are they both vote in this building, normally for a November election, especially a state election, we'll split them between the GP room and the gymnasium. This year, we managed to save money by putting both those districts in the big gymnasium, and we, cordoned off areas, and we were able to work that. Actually, Joyce, I guess you worked there too. No, that worked out well for us.
And we've
But,
actually consolidated, so 1 and 4, we usually do the referendums in the GP room, and we use one tabulator instead of 2. So you only get numbers for the 2 combined. Same thing at Berry School, 3 and 5 are at Berry School. That's one tabulator, you get the numbers combined. We didn't see a need to always have 5 tabulators set up for the 5 districts and 5 separate sets of numbers. People don't seem to want to look for that so much anymore. So we save, because we need to have a moderator per tabulator. So instead of having 5 moderators, we have 3 moderators. Works
Okay.
well. So,
And tabulator tenders, we don't need 2, a first shift and a second shift
Mhm.
for all 5 of those, because we're down to 3.
so rather than consolidating polling locations, we consolidate inside the location. We save money that way.
And as far as waiting lines, this year we had a 70% turnout for the state election. And first thing in the morning, before, leading up to 6 a.m., we were getting a big line here.
Mhm.
Nancy counted 60 people in line, and that was still, maybe 10 minutes before we opened.
Yeah.
It grew. I put a stopwatch on the last person in line. They were in and out and voted in 15 minutes.
Yeah.
So we moved the line, but again, you're not just having one checker, you're having, in that case, 3 checkers handling all those. So it worked.
So we'd be glad to talk to you further, if needed, if you're starting to put some language together and,
Sure.
And the last thing we had, I don't know, Nick, if you take a look at that, there was
agree.
a word used. Is that something that can just be changed automatically as,
outline.
it was a mistake and voters don't need to vote on that, or do you just throw it in with technical corrections?
You throw it in with technical.
Yeah, well, that's,
corrections.
yeah.
We did a few of those last go
Yeah.
around as well. And I invite the commission in reading the charter, there could be more, so anytime you see anything, point it out.
Did you have anything on that?
I was just gonna say, on the issue of one polling place, I've spoken to towns, some colleagues that have made those changes, and their participation plummets.
Yeah.
The frustration is communicating to a diverse community where, there isn't one newspaper that everybody reads, and, and people are ingrained in their habits, they're used to driving by Stony Hill on their way to work, and if it's not there, they'll just say,
Yeah.
they just don't come back.
Well, and if they're, so if they're voting in November at their 3 different locations, and they're voting in a primary, if we have a primary, at their 3 different locations, then we have a referendum and it's only at one location.
Yeah.
Over the years, maybe they'd get used to it, but maybe not.
But at
Most
the
likely.
very next election, they'd show up centrally again.
Yeah.
No, now you're in the wrong place.
We still have people, because you changed the voting lines,
Mhm.
Right.
plum trees, saying, well, no, I don't, I vote here, no, you have to go to Berry School now.
Yeah.
And they look at you like, when did that happen? And that happened what?
Happens every 10 years.
Every 10 years you get redistricting, and so in 2012 was the first time after the 2010 census, the legislature in 2011 redistrict, in 2012 was the first time, and so how many years have those few, I was one of them, few people that got switched from Stony Hill to Berry School, and they still
And I
show up
love
at
it
Stony
when
Hill.
they say, but last time when I voted here, and you haven't voted for 10 years.
Well, we still get people that show up wanting to know where the lever machines are, and that's been 12, 13, 14 years, so.
Wow.
So,
Yeah.
any other questions for Tim or Nancy?
Yeah. Well, if you come up with questions, you can always either email us, we can answer, or if we need to come back, we can do that.
We really appreciate your input and
Yep.
thoroughness. You've
Thank
looked
you.
over
Very
the
helpful.
Yep.
me as well.
Thank you.
So I
Thanks.
think we will move on to some of our own housekeeping. Our first legal bill. Kickass Touche and Santiago, or is it Santagata? Santagata.
I'd like to make a motion, we pay the invoice for $495 for legal fees associated with the Charter Revision Commission.
I'll second that.
Do you will second?
Did I give you the, for $495, that was part of my motion?
Yeah, I think we
did.
did.
Excellent.
Any discussion? Hearing none, I'll move to a vote. All in favor of approving the legal services bill, signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? All right, that's all set. Then our final item. Any other items members of the committee have come up with since our last meeting in terms of additions? More thoughts on what is being proposed to us over the holidays? Taking up most of your gray matter, you didn't really.
I forgot to ask the register of voters if there was room for too high, too low, or just right on the budget.
They haven't left. You want me to grab them?
Are they right there?
I think so.
Yeah.
I'm working on something, but I don't have it ready.
Okay.
Forward yet.
Sure.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Upstairs.
Randy.
Thank
Number
you.
three.
Cool.
Okay.
You mind, Mr. Chairman?
Do we have a
Next.
schedule of who we're going to talk to?
You almost got it.
I gotta look at the minutes in court, yeah, because I think we're,
Oh, yeah.
because it's like Bob is
Too late.
The limiter point?
January, February.
Okay, okay.
They've got
Mhm,
a lot
okay.
in there.
Can I ask a question? Sorry.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there is some debate on the question, budgets being too high. I'm sorry, a question on the ballot for a budget issue, if the question's too high, too low.
Right.
I've heard from the public that there's not enough room on the ballot, so I was looking for your opinion on, is there enough room on the ballot to have that question?
Just right.
We've had it there for years.
Just right.
Well, adding that third just right.
No, I think we were
Oh.
charged with, should we take it out completely? The question.
Just right, right.
Yeah.
So what, do you have an opinion on a budget question, advisory
Well,
question?
I think the problem is state statute requires it to be yes or no. You can't have a third choice. So-
And is it a statute that's gotta be it's gotta be an advisory question?
No.
Oh, what do you say?
I don't think
I don't
the
think so.
advisory question is required, and I don't know if there's so the statute,
Well, that's
you're
true.
saying a statute says yes or no, but
Yeah,
you
an
can't
advisory
do a-
question can, I guess, have a third choice.
All right, so I've heard people say there's not enough room on the ballot, and we should eliminate that question when it comes to budget season. What's your opinion on that?
I think it would fit. I mean, we have, basically you have a school budget question, an advisory question on the school budget, the town budget question, the advisory question on that, and then usually a capital budget. So we have 5 questions generally.
So that size ballot, so if you had just the town, yes, no, too high, too
School,
low, school,
yeah.
yes, no, too high, too low, and just that, no capital, it's a smaller ballot. So, and that's something else we deal with.
Mhm.
The memory cards that we have and keep here are programmed to read 12 questions, so it's 2 sides of a long ballot. That's town, yes, no, too high, too low, school, yes, no, too high, too low, capital, and you could do the same thing on the back if you needed to. Once one of those gets eliminated, we end up having to rent memory cards that are programmed differently because the ballot's smaller. And so you could have they're 14-inch, I think, ballot,
Yeah,
and you could
about
have
14.
questions on the back. So you could have just right, maybe. But then you'd be turning it over.
Yeah, okay.
And it depends on how you word your capital question too. So if your capital says just a yes, no, but it's basically $2 million and you don't specify, like you can't vote on each item on your capital, the Board of Finance puts that together and how it's worded, but sometimes they will list each item. You don't vote on each item, you vote on the whole entire. If you just put the whole entire and didn't list each one, that's less words on there. So it all depends on how it's set up. There'd be room, most likely.
And usually with the capital question, sometimes it can be fairly long. You know, especially if there's a listing
If
of
you
the projects.
enumerate all the different projects,
Yeah.
so it depends on how whoever writes the ballot chooses to write it out.
But I don't see that as being a problem. And yeah, just correcting what I said before, the main questions for the town budget, the school budget, and the capital budget has to be a yes or no question or answer to the question. But the advisory questions, you could throw a third possibility in there.
Or eliminate it.
Or eliminate it. And the advisory, I can't give you figures. If you wanted figures, we could go back and look. But fewer people vote on that than vote on the actual budget. They don't do the too high, too low as much. So
And-
there's a lot of blanks.
But
with
it fits on there. You guys are
And you-
never
it's not a
struggling
problem.
with how are we
Yeah.
gonna lessen the words
Yeah.
because we can't fit yes or no.
And you remember how we
Or
ended
too
up
high,
getting
too
it.
low.
It's just that the Board of Finance at one time, when it got voted down, they said, oh, we don't know why it got voted
Right,
down.
so you think it's important.
So they assumed that, oh, it went down because it's too low. And so, hence the charter revision.
That's what they think.
We'll just leave
And
it
we don't have an opinion
blank,
one way or
right in
the other as to
right.
whether it's, does the Board of Finance look at it and work with it? I don't know.
But my question to you, you don't see a problem
fits.
trying to fit it on, no, perfect, thank you.
I guess you wouldn't want the advisory questions to bump you over to where maybe your more substantive questions, like your capital expenditures, might end up on the reverse side where
Because
people
people
aren't
vote
always
on it.
turning over the ballot.
That's
Yeah.
a good point.
So
Yes.
if you sacrifice that,
Mhm.
I guess my question
I
is,
mean,
is it worth it?
we could show
Or put
you
your advisory questions on the
examples of
back.
advisory ballots. You know, we have fairly large print and and there's lots of room, but certainly if you went to a legal size sheet, there's certainly space for that,
Great.
to have a.
But I think you're right,
Just
you
right.
wouldn't want to sacrifice putting the entire capital question on the back and miss having people vote on it, just to have 3 more sections in the advisory, yes, no,
Oh, one more,
maybe,
yeah.
I don't know. So, yeah.
Great,
Okay,
Okay.
great, thank you.
thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other thoughts from members of the committee about potential changes or changes we've heard? No?
Is anybody coming next meeting? Have we invited anybody?
Yeah. I know we want to talk to Terry and Bob. I don't know if February is the best month to ask either of them, just with the responsibilities, crafting and drafting budgets.
I can reach out to him and talk to him and see.
Okay.
You know, February and March is always gonna be a little crazy.
Mhm.
But if you want to get them in, then probably February would be better.
Sure.
Or no, but I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I know we're back to back almost. Tuesday, Thursday, most of February.
We're gonna start, I'm sorry, the February meeting is,
Yeah, so we'll be in 2 weeks, right? Because we'll go back to the first
Right.
Wednesday.
it's the sixth
Yeah.
week, so February would probably be best. if we
Okay.
could do it. So let me reach out to him and see. So Bob and Terry. Bob Kaslowski and Terry Donsky. Okay.
The financial first.
Is there certain information that you are looking for? That I should
I'd like
request?
to hear their opinions on what is it, the bifurcated budget, basically, you know, that proposal? Is there, what's the name of it specifically?
The split budget?
Yeah.
Or again, the two separate budget, or two, yeah.
Both have to pass.
Yeah, right, okay.
You know what I want to talk about is,
Okay.
about the town side, like the facilities, you know, they were never put into the town budget, so, right, Joyce, remember we were talking about?
Talking about that one.
There's an
Yeah.
expense to have, to operate the schools, but it was always on the burden of the
Yes.
town side.
Yeah.
Town.
Because if the town side went down, it hurts the town side if they have to cut the budgets.
No, there's that part of it too, but part of, I think, the Board of Ed, there's the facilities, but the town considers the facility theirs, so it's always on the town budget, correct?
Yes.
Right.
It's an issue of transparency and clarity to the voters that this is actually part of the schools.
Isn't insurances also in the town side? Isn't there some Board of Ed insurances?
I thought the insurance
Or
was
something.
separate.
I think that's separated out.
Yeah, it's separated out. Anything else?
I don't think so. Is there any other? Yeah, I'll take another peek and I'll email you
Okay.
if there's anybody else we should invite.
Okay.
So we should be thinking in terms of the finance questions in particular for
Mhm.
next time. Yeah. Could you just let us know, Dion, when you speak to them, whether they're able to come or not, so we
Yes.
can just prepare?
Prepare for it,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
Got it.
Maybe
And-
include Dr. Carver in that as
Okay.
well, just.
Okay. And if they can't attend that meeting, is there something else that you would like to focus on, or do you want to think about it and get back with me?
Would your thought be closer to discussion? What you're working on?
Are there any other departments who have come forward, said anything to, the selectmen about any concerns they have?
Well, probably all the departments, you got
Yeah.
The
town
Board
clerk,
of Finance
the
would be
assessor,
another group
That's
to
what I'm saying
have
as well.
before
Yeah.
they get too involved in the budget process.
Public Works,
Yeah.
the health department, I
Public
mean, it might
Works.
be,
I
Yeah.
think we should hit all of them.
Yeah.
Sure.
At least ask them, and if they say they have no concerns and don't wanna
Yeah.
come,
Right.
but they've been asked.
Yeah.
Last go around, we did ask, I think, all the departments, some should,
Yeah.
some didn't.
Right.
Um,
it'd be nice to get a letter saying that
So-
everything's fine, they don't wanna come to.
Right.
Yeah.
And
But
maybe.
certainly the PUC with the bond, the $2 million for
Okay.
capital improvement.
Yeah, you could bite the PUC one night.
We have public input at every meeting.
I think the driver
Nobody
might
is-
be there.
Nobody's coming, so it seems like there are any burning issues,
Yeah.
but it would be nice if people
And maybe
had
add-
concerns that they did come.
Bob Manfreda and Larry Krapis as well, just as chairs of the Board of Finance and Board of Ed.
So I guess then we develop a schedule or just give invitations, but we probably should have a date assigned to that.
Well, I think this is for
Or-
the
I'll
February.
work on putting some dates together for
Okay.
February and March.
Mhm.
I'll reach out to the department heads, I'll reach out to PUC, Bob Manfreda, Larry Krabus, if we think of anybody else, and try to put a schedule together for you for the next couple months. Okay?
Sounds good.
All right.
I think before we really discuss everything, because
Yeah, we want all
really critical to get all the
testimony.
input.
The police department, you might wanna include them. I don't know if there's
I
anything
think the only
pertaining to them.
piece is,
The biggest thing for the police department is where they meet.
yeah, I think we've all agreed that's gotta
Yeah,
be,
I
that's a
think
housekeeping
that's-
change, like that
I
was,
think that's their biggest issue.
yeah.
On things like that, if, and it's really how you guys want to
Mhm.
proceed, but if the committee's of unanimous consent or a strong opinion on something and want to start seeing language, you can piecemeal tell me.
Start, yeah.
Yes, and
Okay.
I can show it at the next meeting or work on it between
So we'll add that as well to the agenda. We'll just go through what we all feel,
Sounds good.
we're in agreement on, move it forward, and allow Nick to start.
Start drafting.
And if you have some ideas in between now and then, you want to email it to me, and then we can, I can get it sent to Nick, and then that way we can at least, have the information flow in. Okay.
So any other questions or concerns from the committee? Get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, thank you guys, see you in a couple weeks.
Yeah.
Woo.